hard to miss that we are running a symposium on this very topic next month, which we're really excited about. And we've sort of used a couple of these webinars, which we've been doing every month this year, to feature a couple of our keynote presentations from that upcoming symposium. So I'm presenting from Taungurung country tonight. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that to any First Nations people here tonight and right across Central Victoria where we do our work. I guess a little bit of background as to why we've chosen this topic of rewilding. If you haven't, if you missed the first webinar on this topic with Annette Rapalski, we sort of see it as a word that, you know, if you ask 20 different people what rewilding is, you'll quite possibly get 20 different answers. And it's something that is very context dependent. And so it's something that is not really widely spoken about in Victoria. And it's something that we think we've kind of got a little bit of an opportunity to shape what it means in Victorian and Central Victorian in particular context. And that's drawing on inspiration, I guess, from projects like we're going to hear about tonight from Derek, and how that sort of fits into our landscape. And I guess a big part of the focus of rewilding that we want to bring to it is that it's inherently different to how rewilding is spoken about in other parts of the world. So you're quite well-known projects in Europe and in the US, where there's very much this idea of people and the wild being two separate things. But we think it's really important that, particularly in Australian context, that people are part of the system, and particularly with the Australian landscape having evolved with really active management for the past 70,000 years, and stewardship of land, that people are at the core of what we're doing when we start talking about rewilding. And we're really thinking about how people can be incorporated into it as well. So it's not people or nature, but this thing where where both can really coexist with things like our agricultural industries and that as well. And we think there's some co-benefits to both, and that's a little bit a part of the project that Derek's going to talk about tonight as well. So this symposium is kind of why we're talking about it for the time being. It's coming up in Bendigo, 13th and 14th September, although the Saturday 14th September site visits are already booked out, but tickets are still available for the symposium on the Friday the 13th, as well as a dinner that evening. So we've just locked in. I'm very excited. Just announced a keynote presentation at the dinner from Lance Lloyd of the Winton Wetlands, talking about some of the rewilding work that Winton Wetlands has undertaken. And we've got a really exciting program for the whole day on Friday. I think we've got 13 presentations throughout the day, and we're hearing about things like rewilding with invertebrates and microbes, right up to the sort of top order predators and things like that. So yeah, it's a day sort of jam-packed full of some of the latest science and practice around this topic. And yeah, very excited, and obviously couldn't do it without our sponsors. But that's enough from me. Before I hand over to Derek, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of Derek's presentation. So any questions that you do have for Derek, please just pop them into the chat as they come to you, and we'll get to them. But yeah, that's all from me. Over to you, Derek.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. I'm calling in today from Nadri country in South Australia, the beautiful Clare Valley. It's a really fascinating topic, this rewilding topic. It's something that we've talked about quite a bit over in this part of the world. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here today to share with you, I guess, yeah, the project that I'm working on, which is a fantastic project called Marna Banggara. I'm just going to have a crack at sharing my screen. Is that coming through all right? I'll assume.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll assume it's coming through. So no, thanks for that, Chris. So yeah, I'd like to just pay my respects before I start to the traditional owners of the Marna Banggara, the lands on which Marna Banggara project is taking place, the Narungga people of the Yorke Peninsula, and just really acknowledge their strong links to country, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and those that might be here today. So I guess to start us off, I'd like to just provide a bit of context as to what the Marna Banggara Project is. So for those of you that had the pleasure of heading over to South Australia and heading down the foot of the Yorke Peninsula, Marna Banggara is a project that's taking place at the tip of the peninsula. So the very, very sort of foot, if you like. And the idea of the project is relatively simple. I'll give you, I guess, the elevator pitch sort of version. The idea is that, there's some good remnant vegetation that exists down the tip of the peninsula. There's some really productive agricultural areas. There's a really strong sort of tourism industry. People love to visit the place, lots of boating, camping, fishing, sort of opportunities. But at the end of the day, some of the landscapes have been in decline over the last few years. We've unfortunately losing some of, younger population to other areas. They're sort of moving to, cities or other regions to look for opportunities. So I guess local stakeholders, land care champions, farmers, business people, really identified that, some work needs to be done to, encourage, this part of the world to remain healthy and prosperous, I suppose. So, the simple elevator pitch is, let's get rid of introduced predators. Let's get rid of foxes and cats. Let's bring back some of these native species that have gone missing, knowing that 95% of the small to medium ground-dwelling mammals that used to occur on the peninsula have gone missing from the landscape. And by bringing back these native species, we can restore these ecological functions. And that's really where the rewilding concept sort of applies to our part of the world. Let's restore these lost ecological functions. Native animals have been replaced with, rabbits, rats, cats, foxes, and those functions that they perform in the environment are different from what native species are doing. So let's bring them back. We can improve local biodiversity, but we can also encourage sort of agricultural productivity to improve as well. So the obvious example is to reduce fox numbers to improve lambing rates, but by reducing cat numbers as well, we can hopefully improve birthing rates with less sort of disease, and improve sort of meat quality as well with less sarco. And by promoting a healthy ecosystem, that'll help to keep the local tourism industry strong, and people will keep coming there for the reasons that they like to come there, to see wildlife, to enjoy, beautiful natural places. So easy. Control introduced predators, bring back native species that have gone missing, and restore those ecological functions. What could go wrong? So this is a close-up map. So what we've got here is the project area. You'll notice across the narrow bit of the peninsula, if you like, is a hashed line. So the basic sort of starting principle for the project, if you like, in terms of that introduced predator control, was to try and address the situation of, well, if we do reduce fox and cat numbers over time, they're just going to keep coming down the peninsula and keep reinvading the area. So the idea was hatched to build a fence across the narrow proportion, and we can use that fence to help slow reinvasion rates, if you like. But you can see there on the screen, we've got some of those sort of protected areas, if you like, in the National Conservation Reserve, represented in green. You've got the native vegetation that remains on the bottom of the peninsula in sort of that hashed green. So it's probably about sort of 30 to 40% of remnant vegetation remains in that area. But at the end of the day, it is a mixed landscape. It's a working landscape. There are lots of farms there. There are it's a very profitable dry land agriculture area. We've got 4 towns within that project area. We've got lots of sort of fishing shacks and lifestyle blocks, and there's heritage. There's a lot of that native vegetation that's outside of the reserve system is protected through heritage agreements and obviously by legislation as well. But yeah, it's a complex landscape. There's hundreds and hundreds of landholders, if you like. There's lots of business owners. There's and there's the big land managers as well. So while it seems like a simple concept, there's plenty of complex interactions. So yeah, luckily I've been invited to the symposium in Bendigo, which I'm really looking forward to presenting at. So I'm going to go into, I guess, some of the challenges that we face as a project, have a bit of a deeper dive at the symposium. But today I thought I'd focus on the number one part of our project being successful going forward, and that is, having successful introduced predator control. It's going to be a difficult thing to bring back all of the lost habitat. We can help to protect the habitat that's remaining, but the main reasons we've lost those native species and lost a lot of those ecological functions is that habitat loss, which is a little bit harder to address. We can try and address those things over time. But foxes and feral cats predation has been the outside of that has been the most significant factor. So at the end of the day, for our project to succeed, we need to knock down foxes and cats and keep their numbers down. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that today. So I've kind of robbed from a sort of a presentation or workshops that we run for local landholders. I've just pulled a few slides out from these workshops that we run. So look, at the end of the day, controlling foxes and cats, there are some good overall strategies to adopt. It's got to be done across a landscape scale, but we're basically using all of those sort of basic tools that you might have in your toolbox. So at the end of the day, across a broad scale, baiting is the best option. We undertake aerial baiting where we can within legislative restrictions. We undertake ground baiting across much of our project area. We employ trapping as a strategic option. We undertake shooting. Shooting's quite effective in a mixed landscape in the agricultural landscape. The fence is obviously there as a useful tool to help slow down, I guess, reinvasion or immigration of cats and foxes into the project area. And we also use other tools that are available, like Felixes, and we undertake sort of den control as well. Where a big part of this project is looking at refining and improving our current methods. So, for example, baiting, while it's a wonderful tool, we're looking at ways to reduce impacts by non-target species, making sure that those baits that we put out are there and available for foxes and cats. And ideally, in an ideal world, the fewer baits that we can put out but target those foxes and cats, the easier our project will become. We're looking at the use of detector dogs to be quite strategic. There's some real advances in recent years in thermal shooting technology, drone tracking and shooting. Teams of experts getting out there. They're doing amazing things on the ground, and also just that habitat and sort of resource modification. So just looking at those areas that cats and foxes might utilise as predator pathways or refuge sites, if we can reduce those opportunities, it makes our control options more effective over time. This is just an overview of the project area to show. We've called our fox baiting program, which has been running for over 20 years in the project area now, the Baiting for Biodiversity program, and this is just a bit of a heat map of where we get coverage across the project area. So you can see that there's pretty good coverage in some areas, but there's also areas where we don't have coverage at the moment, and for a variety of reasons. It might be access, landholder permissions, or preferences for landholders in terms of what kind of control that they undertake, or there's quite a few different reasons why we don't have coverage across the whole area. And but at the end of the day, we've got pretty good coverage, and we've been doing a pretty good job with foxes over the last sort of 20 years. But cats are another issue as well. There are for our project to be effective, we need to knock down both foxes and cats. We need to do that simultaneously. So cats are a bit of a trickier beast, if you like. They're, just their general modus operandi, if you like. They're natural hunters. They're not natural scavengers so much like a fox is, which makes fox baiting programs quite effective. So, so to target cats, you really need to be, sort of quite strategic and prepared to utilize a range of tools, but also use natural environmental conditions to your benefit. So cats will take baits that have been designed to be attractive and palatable to cats, but by the same token, if there's live prey running around, they will go for the live prey every day of the week. Now, I've just got a series of remote camera images. This is from a previous project that I worked on quite a few years ago, back to 2015 now. But it really just highlights, the problem that you're facing when it relates to sort of baits and cats. We were doing a sort of a bait trial here. So the two stakes there did have a couple of different baits at the time that we deployed them. But you can see one bait still visible. But if we go through the series of images, you can see that the cat's not really showing much interest in the bait. Something more interesting in the bush, and sure enough, pops out of the bush with a Spinifex hopping mouse there in its mouth. So, that's I like to sort of bring up these images, because it really just highlights what you're facing when you're talking about feral cats in the bush. I thought I might just talk a little bit about some of the methods we use. These slides were sort of set up to, I guess, as a guide or a helpful how-to, if you like, for landholders that we've got in our area, for landholders that are keen to undertake work on their own. So at the end of the day, trapping can be quite an effective tool in a strategic way. It's quite labour intensive over a broad scale, and to maintain traps over a big area over a long time, it takes an enormous amount of resources. But for strategic work, it can be very effective, and it can be very effective at targeting those foxes and cats that are a bit savvier, that may be, for some reason, will walk past baits and are not interested. So, we might just talk a little bit about, where and when, some of the baits and lures. So the trap types that we're using, cage traps are used across a large area. They're quite effective in relation to, I guess, cats and foxes that might have some interaction with people. And might be used to things like fences and human scent and those sorts of things. But really, for those wild living cats and foxes that really don't have any interaction with humans at all, soft jaw leg hold traps are more effective. There are legislative restrictions to consider, and we're actually moving into sort of trap alert systems, which are basically systems that allow us to monitor traps remotely and reduce resource inputs. So this is just a bit of a map as to some of the things that you're sort of thinking about when you're looking at using control options. So basically, you're just looking for signs of cats and foxes. So the most obvious signs are normally tracks, prints, and also scats, particularly with foxes. Foxes will scat in prominent places to help mark their territory. Cats are a bit different. But at the end of the day, yeah, you're looking for signs of these animals. You're looking along road edges, you're looking along fence lines, you're looking in sandy areas. Sandy areas can be useful to pick up those prints and tracks. Game trails, these animals are moving around the landscape, and they're looking for, just like we would, easy pathways to get through. And any other points of interest that you might have in the landscape. There might be watering points in summer and those sorts of things, or even just old buildings, farm dumps where there might be rabbits or rats and those sorts of things. So baits and lures can be quite interesting if you get a chance to have a talk to a trapper. They'll definitely have pretty strong opinions about what works and what doesn't work. But we generally, for Marna Banggara, we sort of take the approach of trying, if we're using food-based lures, which can be quite good, particularly at times of the year when prey items or scavenging options might be limited. But we generally look for those foods that they might be picking up in the natural environment. So if you've got lots of rabbits around, rabbit can be a really effective bait. If you're along the coast, fish frames and those sorts of things can be really effective. And some trappers will absolutely swear by KFC as well. So I'm not necessarily convinced, but it can be quite effective. Olfactory lures are those sort of scent-based lures. So again, you can use sort of scent-based lures that might have a food that might, that foxes and cats might, pick up the scent and think that it's going to lead them to food, like things like tuna oil, even things like blood and bone and those sorts of things can get animals interested. Urine, scats can be actually super effective and particularly so for those wild living animals. Certainly a wild living animal that picks up the scent of another animal in its home range is going to be quite interested. We even keep sort of male and female scents separate. So if we're targeting, animals that we've seen on cameras that we know might be a male or a female, we can kind of target, be quite specific. And there are lots of commercial lures, hormones, anal glands. Really, the main tip I can give there is if you are using those, they definitely go in the back of the ute and not in the cab with you. Visual lures can be quite effective for cats as well as a sort of a broadcast sort of lure. So there's a picture on the right there. That's a bobcat trap in the background. The tinsel out the front is more designed to potentially attract an animal on at night from a long distance away. In the breeze, that tinsel might be flickering around and glinting in the moonlight. So that might just be a point of interest for a fox or a cat to travel, hundreds of meters to come and check out. And then once they're in the vicinity of the trap, hopefully the lure or the bait that you're using in the trap will kind of bring them right into your set. So like I mentioned earlier, the main trap types we use are sort of cage traps and soft jaw leg hold traps. There are a lot of varieties of cage traps, and there's certainly a bit of an art to setting them correctly. Soft jaw leg hold traps, I personally think of that really, they're really effective for your wild living animals. So thanks to the Kangaroo Island Landscape Board, I think we borrowed this slide from them. This is just a few tips and tricks if you are setting traps. So I won't harp on it for too long. But the main thing to consider is if you're going to the trouble of setting a trap, really make an effort to make sure that trap is set. It's a quality set, if you like. Quality definitely prevails over quantity in this regard, because an animal that enters a trap set and then, if that trap malfunctions or doesn't operate correctly and that animal can escape, it'll never go near another one. So we generally we'll make we'll make as much effort as possible to make it blend into the environment. Make sure that your lures and your baits are used in a sort of in a way that they're not overpowering, you're really thinking about those pathways that they're using. You just want to make sure that that your trap is set correctly. So, a little bit of trap maintenance, goes a long way. The worst thing that can possibly happen is if you're sort of bedded a trap into the environment and it's sitting quite nicely, and an animal comes in and investigates it. If there's a twig or a stick or something like that that stops the door from closing completely, that's the absolute worst thing that can happen. So make sure your traps are well bedded and are operating correctly. Here's a couple of examples of some leg hold trap sets that we use. The one on the left there is what we might call a walkthrough. So we've got sort of a narrow point where the movement of the animal is funneled. We would use sort of 2 leg hold traps in the ground there, and use a lure in between the middle of them, and you're basically you're trying to have your sets to set up so that animal, as it moves through the narrow point, you're going to get your animal to step in the place that you want. We're really careful when we use sort of that type of set. We make sure that it's not being used by non-target animals and those sorts of things. Quite a lot of consideration needs to come into the use of leg hold traps. The one on the right there is what might be referred to as a hole set. So that's where you sort of dig a hole that might be indicative of like a rabbit or a mouse or something like that, or another prey item. And again, you might use sort of natural features, or potentially bring in some logs or sticks or something like that as a bit of a guiding mechanism to bring the animal and guide them into where you want them to be. We just make the note here from Marna Banggara that soft jaw leg hold traps, you need to sort of check your local restrictions. They're registered for use for foxes and rabbits, and specific sizes as well. You want to use the smaller sizes. We have ministerial approval here in South Australia to use leg hold traps on cats, but there are also quite a few restrictions in relation to that as well. So another activity that we sort of do to target animals is den control. Again, can be quite labour intensive, but can be really useful, particularly if you sort of map out den sites and you can come back and revisit them on an annual basis. And you can really break that sort of breeding cycle, particularly for foxes. Targeting dens in sort of winter and spring when the vixen's using the dens with the cubs. There's a registered product for use called Denko Fume, and that mode of operation is by carbon monoxide, and it's quite humane. It sort of puts the animal to sleep, but it basically works on identifying a den site. You're checking that site, you're looking for prints and those sorts of things, making sure that your target species is using that den. You might use cameras. The 2 little cubs there, adorable as they might be, were picked up on camera at one of our den sites. But once you've identified that you've got a den that is being used, you're identifying all those entrances, blocking off all the entrances but one, and then you apply your Denko Fume into the den and cover up the entrance. And it's quite a humane option for fox control. Can be labour intensive, but it's a good one to come back to as well, because other foxes that move into the area might pick up scents and reopen those dens. So it's a good way to come back and good way to break the breeding cycle. One of the really important things that you want to be thinking about with your programs is monitoring, understanding what's happening with fox and cat activity. So we use cameras across a landscape scale for, our broad scale sort of monitoring program. So this is a camera array that we've sort of got down the sort of the toe end of the peninsula, if you like. We've Yeah, we've made quite a bit of progress with our project, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the symposium with reintroducing brush-tailed bettongs to the project area, who are a really important soil engineer in the landscape. And so we've reintroduced them down to the tip of the peninsula. So we use our camera array to sort of monitor native species, but also those predators, and it helps us, it helps us to, I guess, work out if our control activities are working. We can sort of do before after analysis if we're applying particular control techniques in certain areas, but it provides us with an opportunity to have some sort of trigger points where we can up the ante, if you like, if we're seeing cat and fox activity in particular areas. We can sort of monitor that activity, and if it hits a certain spot, we can actually come in and implement control activities to bring those numbers down. So these graphs on the screen, these are specifically from the Bettong translocation site, so from within Dilpa-Garoonda Innes National Park at the tip of the peninsula. So it's just a couple of years worth of our camera data where we'll take a relative activity index, which is basically just a percentage of camera trap nights that foxes and cats are detected. Our target that we're aiming at, based on sort of literature review and understanding of cats and foxes in a sort of mesic environment, is 3%. We'll keep a track on that over time, depending on different species that we might be looking at bringing back. But we've sort of used 3% as a sort of target. We've been able to, the longer the project's been going, we've been able to sort of consistently sort of bring that activity down. Foxes, they're an annual breeding species. Their numbers will tend to increase over summer and then into autumn as young, foxes are dispersing across the landscape. So there is, one reason I sort of put this graph up is to show you can even start to see that that annual sort of increase, seasonal increases can be expected with those animals. Cats are more responsive to natural environmental conditions, prey availability and those sorts of things. But we're really looking at bringing our project into the next realm with technologies that are becoming available at the moment and are being used more broadly. So a couple of those things are these trap alert systems. So trap alert network is being able to monitor your traps remotely. So basically knowing when traps are closed and when they're open. It can really improve your effectiveness. If you're monitoring a trap array of 50 traps, you might on an average night have maybe 5 to 10% of traps that might be triggered during that night. Whether it's captured animals or not, that's another story, or whether it's targets or non-targets also. But if you know that you only have to go out in the morning and check those 5 traps, then it can really make your program more effective, and you can probably manage more traps than you would without. And we're also using artificial intelligence platforms online to help us with our camera image data management and analysis. With our camera arrays, we collect well and truly over millions of images a year. So any kind of way that we can utilize volunteers or artificial intelligence to help us wade through that is a real advantage. But I think I've talked enough. So I just want to acknowledge our project partners, and really thanks very much for allowing me to come in today and have a chat. And it's been a real pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. We've got a couple of questions. So Louise wanted to know how you refine baiting to only target cats and foxes.
Yeah, that's tricky. So your standard sort of fox baiting is buried baits and I think that's would be the same in Victoria. So generally speaking, foxes are natural scavengers. They'll even bury, sort of prey that they've taken down. You often think back to the adage of the fox in the chook house. It'll kill every chook, and they'll quite often cache food for later. That's a natural behaviour. So having baits buried underground, is a natural thing for a fox to do. They'll come along and sniff the bait, and they might even think it's another fox has cached it. Or so by having the bait buried, that can be very effective at limiting surface dwelling non-targets like birds or reptiles and those sorts of things. You will get some non-targets that might be interested. We're luckily in Australia to a certain degree because the toxin that we do use, 1080, is a naturally occurring compound in the Gastrolobium genus of plants that are common over in WA, not so much over this part of the world. But a lot of native species do have a natural tolerance to 1080, and it's really quite specific to introduced species. So while you might get some element of traction from non-targets, if you use your deployment methods to minimise any risk. So for goannas are a species that we sort of take a real care for, because heath goannas are actually quite a rare animal in our part of the world, and they're a species we're looking to improve the trajectory for. So our bait distances, are placed so that, look, even if a goanna were to happen to come across a bait, it's going to be unlikely that they'll come across, lots of them in a short amount of time that might, potentially be harmful. And aerial baiting's a different one, because those are surface laid baits. Again, it's the time of year. You're getting baits on the ground when cats and foxes are scavenging, and so they're not finding, and that's when a lot of your non-targets, like reptiles, you really just need to think about your strategies of how you deploy. But that's part of where your monitoring comes in as well. We do sort of camera monitoring on baits just to try and keep a handle on what's happening with our non-targets. Ravens, they're a particular bugbear. They're so smart. And while they might not necessarily consume baits, they do like to find them and play with them and chew at them. And quite often, if you're marking your bait stations with flagging tape, they see the white Toyota drive along a track and the flagging tape go up at 500 metre, kilometre intervals, and they can come along and find your bait station. So you just have to be a bit savvy to those types of things if it is happening, and use counter measures to try and hide your baits, so quite a few different strategies.
Stephanie asked what work is going on either at your project or elsewhere that you know of to reduce the use or the reliance, I guess, on 1080 and leg traps from a welfare point of view, and to minimise kind of any pain and suffering, I guess, of these animals.
That's a great question. Any project like ours, relies on being able to be effective at what you do. So for our project to be effective, we need to reduce fox and cat numbers at a rate that is higher than the natural reproductive rate for those animals. Like at the end of the day, we cannot introduce brush-tailed bettongs, yagi back into the environment if cats and foxes are there. They would just get smashed. So I guess I'm sort of, to move it back to your question, like at the end of the day, we need to use tools that can control foxes and cats for projects like this to be successful. And we'll use those monitoring techniques to, test the efficacy of the techniques that we're using. We use expert techniques. We use best practice methodologies. So a lot of our, trapping methods and those sorts of things, for example, are done by, specialist contractors, people with lots and lots of training. The last thing that we want to do is to have, native species or non-target animals walking into traps. Cage traps, generally there's, you can just let them go, but there are potential pitfalls for non-target animals in those. By the same token, soft jaw leg hold traps are far more humane than probably people think. These traps are designed to close and hold an animal's foot. They're not like the old school rabbit traps that you might have seen on your uncle's farm when you were a kid, or those sorts of things. They've got a rubber, they're offset. They've got a rubber component that holds an animal in place, and so by adjusting the tension and those sorts of things, you can set those to be really quite specific in terms of the weight of the animal that's setting them. And so it really just comes back to best practice techniques, employing those control options with expertise, but also monitoring what's going on. So we're monitoring, obviously cats and foxes, but we're monitoring native species as well. What we've found with our monitoring program over the last few years, that while cats and fox numbers are coming down, and some of those non-target species that might be impacted by baiting programs like the heath goanna, those numbers are actually going up. So overall, the project is benefiting those species.
Yeah, thanks. Question from John, which is I think more directed at biolinks and the topic as a whole, around concerns about, I guess, the term rewilding not necessarily translating into an Australian context, and the example of trying to get rid of things like predators in the landscape as opposed to bringing those species back. I guess from my point of view, a counter to that would be that I think part of rewilding Australia as a whole probably is bringing back native predators, things like dingoes to areas where they've been wiped out, and quolls as well. So there is a role for our native predators there. And have we considered another label? Lots of discussions around this and how we approach, I guess, the topic. But yeah, I think for us, it's an opportunity to, I guess, address how people think about rewilding, and it's a term that people gravitate towards. So we kind of, there's a lot of interest in it, but something that I guess we wanted to take the opportunity to try and shape people's perspectives of in an Australian context. Derek, I'd be interested, if it's a term that you guys use, or if it's something that you try and avoid, or sort of how you see it.
It's a great question. And I actually looked at your symposium from last year. It was a fascinating discussion that was had with the panelists about the term rewilding. Rewilding is a term that we use. We're careful to, I guess, with the audience that we do use that term, because I think it is a term that resonates with much of the community. And for us, rewilding is about the re-establishment of lost ecological processes. It's you might put rewilding into your Google search engine and you'll come back with with the European and American context, which might be more inclined to be restoring habitats to pre-human situations, but that's certainly not what we're about. We're in a working landscape, which I think it really applies to the biolinks landscape as well. We've got farmers, we've got farms, we've got towns, we've got businesses, we've got some really important conservation values to protect there as well. So we're not about restoring it to pre-European state, because that means that farmers can't continue to farm and people can't continue to visit that part of the world. So we're careful how we use the term rewilding. I wouldn't use it in a group full of and I didn't actually really introduce myself. I'm the project manager for Marna Banggara at the moment, but I have been involved with the project for a few years, and I first came on board as an ecologist, and I also have quite a bit of expertise in that sort of pest animal space. But I wouldn't sit down with a group of ecologists and use the term rewilding, because I don't think it's a really accepted term in that sphere. But if I wanted to engage with the community, if I started using terms like conservation translocations or, their eyes would glaze over. But the term rewilding really resonates. So we do use it, but we might shift our language depending on our audience. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, thanks. That's great to hear. It aligns a lot with the way we're talking about it as well. So and a question, I guess, on a similar vein from Catherine. I guess mentioning the project, the stage that you're talking about, it aligns really clearly with landscape scale pest animal control projects in Victoria, which aren't labelled as rewilding.
Yep.
So why is this falling under rewilding? I guess my impression of it is that it's sort of step one of a rewilding project, I suppose. Is that the way you're looking at it?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I guess my talk went for much longer than 15 minutes, but I was trying to think about time frame. So our project is multifaceted. We are talking about a 20-year plus, hopefully ongoing. Really, we're in the early stages. But yeah, in terms of for I guess the re-establishment of lost ecological processes to happen, and for natural landscapes, and so that's plant species, animal species to be happier and more diverse, and for us to be able to, we've lost like 95% of the small to medium-sized ground-dwelling native animals on the Yorke Peninsula over the last 150 to 200 years. Like, that's a massive amount. We've gone from like 30 to, or over 30 to 2, and that's huge. They've been replaced by foxes, they've been replaced by cats, they've been replaced by black rats, house mice, rabbits, hares, so the first step in being able to reverse that is introduce predator control, because they're a massive part of the problem. It's not the only part of the problem. Habitat availability is certainly also a massive part of the problem, and that's probably a discussion for another day. But you don't do these things without introduced predator control, and it just won't happen. So it's a bit of a blunt thing. So I tend to focus on. I like to highlight that fact to to people that might be new to these kinds of projects is, this kind of stuff does not happen without fox and cat control. And that's the reason why, big agencies like AWC and Bush Heritage are building these massive fence sanctuaries. It's to provide areas of Australia that do not have foxes and cats. We're taking the approach that those projects are fantastic, and they're a really important part of conservation in an Australian context. But projects like, Marna Banggara and, goals that you guys are trying to achieve through the Alliance, we need to be able to do this sort of landscape scale stuff outside of fences for conservation to be really meaningful. So while we do have the fence across the peninsula, that's a management tool. We are never going to get rid of foxes and cats within our project area. There's too many. There's 5 roads, open roads that go through the fence. There's beaches on both sides. There's over 20 gates that farmers, use for, normal farming practices. We know that we're just never going to get rid of the stage where we get rid of them. But we want to get to this. We call it the Goldilocks zone. It's the zone where, we can use control methods to bring down the level of foxes and cats to a level that allows us to bring back these really vulnerable native species that are doing important functions in the environment, and for them to survive. And we're sort of demonstrating that with the brush-tailed bettongs over the last couple of years. This is an animal that used to be present across probably 90% of southern Australia. Hundreds of years ago, and it's critically endangered. It almost went extinct. So, it's just really important.
Awesome. All right, we're getting close to 7. There's a few more questions here, so we'll try and whip through these quickly if we can. Michael wanted to know if you could give a rough indication of costs and where's the funding come from for this project.
Yeah, so that's a great question. We've the project really got underway with a bit of seed funding from the Commonwealth through the Regional Landscapes Priority Fund from 2018 to 2023. Marna Banggara it was called Great Southern Arc at the time. It's been renamed, but was granted $2.3 million, of which approximately $1 million might have went towards the fence. That's a rough figure. So there are other project partners that have put in, potentially the equivalent of that over the last 5 years. But without that seed funding from the Commonwealth and the construction of that fence, this project probably would never have got legs. That's a ballpark figure. There's lots of in-kind contributions from stakeholders and landholders. And we've got, over, sort of dozens of project partners, if you like. But we're in terms of the pure team that's working on it, we've got 6 staff members that work on our project. So we sort of got the project manager. We've got an arm that sort of is engagement. We've got the the ecologist space for the the biodiversity and translocations, and then we've got a small predator control team. So it's not it can be done on can be scaled up and down. It takes a bit of money, but it's not. It's probably small potatoes if you think of the contributions that the agricultural and tourism industries contribute to the Yorke Peninsula, for example, which would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars per annum. So, yeah.
From Michelle, to what extent do foxes help keep rabbit numbers down?
Yeah, that's a good question, and they probably do to a small degree. We actually do keep a bit of a track on rabbit numbers because rabbits are an important part of that equation, particularly for cats as well. Higher rabbit numbers will tend to be, in situations where there are high rabbit numbers, it can actually lead to higher populations of foxes and cats, and it can be quite an important part of their diet at times. So by the same token, I guess, foxes, are reducing rabbit numbers in that extent, but I think there's a lot of value to using rabbit control methods as well and also looking at those longer term, replacing foxes and cats with native predators that can keep rabbit numbers down in the long term as well. So yes, they do. I don't think there's a farmer out there that would actually take massive amounts of foxes to keep rabbit numbers down over not having foxes. I don't think that's a good argument to keep foxes, but you do need to consider them all as part of the part of the ecosystem. And I think as you reduce fox and cat numbers, you need to think about those native predators that are going to help you keep rabbit numbers down, mouse numbers down, rat numbers down. And there are lots of options out there for that. So,
Yeah, get some quolls back out there to do the
yeah,
job.
yeah.
From Albert, how do you stop ferals entering the project area along the roads? And I assume
Yeah.
you've sort of got cameras and things like that to monitor that.
Yeah, that's right. We do employ sort of control along the fence to try and limit the animals that are coming through roads. We have I think we call them wings, if you like. So when there's an open, public access road through the fence, the fence will come up to the road, and there'll be wings on either side. So that it's not so much to stop animals from finding their way through the winged bit. It's more if you've got emus, kangaroos, other animals running along the fence line, it sort of redirects them away from the roadway. So animals will go through. We're not at the stage where, because we're not an eradication project, we're not at the stage where we, are watching every cat and fox that gets around or gets through. But it is, we do use the fence as a strategic way because it will funnel animals. So it's an opportunity, to try and get foxes and cats right there. But we've also got issues at the bigger issues are probably at the coastal end. So our fence sort of stops at the top of the primary dune. So there's probably more movement of animals along beaches than there is roads.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Lots of things to think about, which we'll get to time. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll dig a bit deeper at the symposium. Louise was wondering if you can say a bit more about new techniques, particularly ones involving AI. And I made a note to ask you about Felix's as well, so I'll chuck that in there too.
Yeah, so we don't Felix's. I've found them to be quite a useful strategic tool. They're very target specific, but they're not cheap. And for projects that maybe don't have a huge amount of funding, it's tricky to get access to them at the moment, and they can be quite expensive. But in terms of effectiveness, they're getting better and better. The algorithms and technology on board Felix's these days are better than they were, when they first came out. So I think they're a great tool. But look, at the end of the day, you're leasing them for over 10K a pop per annum. So you use them strategically. But I think they're a great tool to have in the toolkit. But they're not a fix-all. There's not really going to be many projects that can afford to have them on the scale that they need. And there are going to be animals that are going to be a bit shy of sort of them as well. But yeah, overall, really target specific. We find them. We've found that the interactions with non-target species, it's spot on. It's targeting the animals that you want, so it's a good option. Other control, I guess the trap alert technology. There's a trap alert technologies have sort of been around for a while, but there's some new tech on the market in the last couple of years that's a real game changer. And the Kangaroo Island Cat Eradication Project, if you're interested in more information, they might have some information online, but they're at the forefront of employing this celium technology, which is low powered VHF. So traps have these little nodes on them, and they can tell when trap doors are open and closed. You can use them for leg holds or for cages. The mechanism operates a bit differently for both, but you can use them on either. And what you do need is it communicates via VHF, so you need a network of hubs around that can sort of talk to all your traps in the landscape, and then they can relay the information back to whoever's got access. And so if a farmer was running some traps on his property, he or she could get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, get on the phone and see which traps are open and closed, and head straight out and do them first thing. Same as a conservation land manager. There's talk about further developing those things to make traps open and closable remotely. Camera technology too, so you can see what's in your trap. And that's useful in regards to if it's a false trigger. So if the trap's closed, but it's just because an animal's hit the trap from the outside or something like that, that means that and the artificial. So celium technology is out there. If you sort of Google celium with a C, you might get some information on that. There's quite a few projects picking up on this stuff, and we're trying to get on board as well. And then the artificial intelligence for camera analysis is getting better and better. A lot of the players in that market might have been sort of based in the US or Europe, and so a lot of their algorithms are based around animals occurring there, but it's coming to Australia, and those algorithms are getting pretty good. And the platform that we use, it's one of those platforms where we've got training capability, so we can plug a lot of images in there and help to train the system to get better and better. So it's not necessarily going to identify your small birds or your small reptiles down to species level, but they're getting pretty good at identifying anything bigger than a rat to species level. Pretty good. And it depends on if you got potoroos and bandicoots in the same area, and bedongs, it might be a bit tricky, but we've got bedongs, we've got Tamar wallabies, and we've got kangaroos. So for macropods, it picks up the three quite easily. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. John was wondering tactically when shooting makes sense and how the range of predators slash re-veg disruptors affect this. So when you talk about range, I assume talking about home range and things like that. So yeah, e.g., deer, goats, foxes, rabbits. And does it shift by the scale we're talking? So private property scale versus large public land areas, and I guess how you approach that strategically.
Yeah, historically for us, we haven't employed shooting as a major tool to this point in time. I guess at the stage of the project we're in, where we've been focusing on, you know, lowering the impact of foxes and cats in the native vegetation, in the more remnant intact vegetation, and we've got fairly dense vegetation, and sort of traditional spotlighting and shooting methods are just not effective in a closed within a closed understory, but it can be a very effective method across an agricultural landscape. So farmers, we sort of encourage and try to engage farmers in sort of shooting. Quite often, it will be linked to lambing, obviously to protect agricultural assets. But yeah, it can certainly be useful, I think, for foxes and cats, across open paddocks and those sorts of things. And different. Yeah, we I think the timing, different times of the year can be more effective. Like we sort of liaise closely with the guys on Kangaroo Island, and they find that their cat control is most effective in winter. Partly because that's when cats are, struggling to find, prey items. But it doesn't match up exactly with what we see on the mainland. So I think, if you're monitoring the landscape. But yeah, certainly with foxes, you apply it when foxes are young, naive foxes are dispersing across the landscape in summer and autumn. So that can be a good time to bring those foxes out of the system before they get into their first breeding cycle.
All right, last one from Mark. Can Denko fume work in rabbit warren fumigation as well?
Yeah, have to check the label conditions. I don't want to say something that's not on the directions for use. I've got a funny feeling that Denkofume might only be registered for use on foxes. So for rabbit fumigation, there are other products that I think are registered for use. The reason why probably Denkofume is not a popular product is cost at the moment. It's very effective and very humane, but a single cartridge is probably upwards of $60. Which, it's money well spent in my book, but for a farmer that might be looking to knock down rabbits, it's probably not a cost-effective option. But we're looking at but we've got quite a few farmers in our area that they just don't want to bait for whatever reasons. Might be working dogs, or it might be biosecurity conditions related to their farm, or personal preference, and that's fine. But quite often these farmers are open to professional shooters, or potentially trapping. Trapping or den fumigation is one that a lot of farmers are really interested in. So if we can overcome that cost barrier, and potentially help farmers to apply other techniques, that's something that we're really looking at the moment, and it increases our footprint. And for this project, really to work, it's that community ownership and engagement and support is as important as killing those cats and foxes.
Right. Well, thanks, Derek. Thanks for your time, and staying a bit over time. Really great.
No, that's right. Apologies for the technical glitches, but really look forward to getting to Bendigo in a few weeks' time. And appreciate having the opportunity to chat about great project Marna Banggara.